on which our event's taking place today. And here in Ballarat, that's the oh, sorry, my phone just went off too. The Wadawurrung people, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. A huge thank you, Sarah. I know for those of you who perhaps don't know, Sarah has been at home with her own children over the Melbourne lockdown and moving in and out of her school, Bentleigh West Primary School, sharing the leadership role there with her principal, so hugely demanding. She's been in at school today, and so we really thank her for her time today. Most of you would know Sarah, that's why you would all be logged on, I am sure, and like me, many of you would have been following her for a long time and probably listened to many of her other presentations. We know she started her role, and she'll talk to us a little bit about this, as a learning support teacher, and also with a real personal interest in students who grapple with literacy and in acquiring literacy because her own children had some challenges, and then moved into a leadership role at Bentleigh West, and through that has been instrumental in taking their school with the fantastic team they've got in place on a huge improvement journey. And that's really where she came to light, unless you've been following Sarah maybe in that learning difficulties area, became a lot more well known to us, because certainly Bentleigh have become very well known and hosted some really good professional development events and have had some open days, which a lot of people have gone down to. Sarah and I had a little bit of a chat about what she might talk about today, and I just explained to her that we're a really diverse group of people with a huge range of experience. Some of us just at the beginning of our journey about evidence-informed, the most up-to-date evidence-informed approaches to literacy, and others much further along. And our schools are at different stages, and we've got speech pathologists, we've got parents, we've got principals and teachers, a really diverse audience. So I really just said to Sarah, we will be in your hands and are happy to learn anything from you, I suppose. All of us who work in schools are interested in improving our results. All of us are interested in what works, and we know that most things work a bit, but what do we really need to focus on to get this right? What PD should we be offering to our teachers and ourselves, and what resources should we be going to? Because we know it's actually overwhelming out there. And to make sure we're honing in and using our time well, and using particularly that 2-hour literacy block at school really well. I will attempt to monitor the chat, and so Sarah's really experienced this, she will too. Please use that and put your questions in there, because that's also really helpful to Kathleen, Reid and I, and that might help us drive some further sessions and professional learning for people too. So welcome and thank you, Sarah, and let's get started.
Thanks for having me. I'll just share my screen. I always like to start with this. Having 2 children of my own who struggle with difficulties, it's always really important that obviously they have to get through school, and it's really tough. And eventually, hopefully, they'll do exceptionally well, which I'm sure they will. There we go. Just a little bit of a history. So I did start my career in the UK, and I started teaching in a school with a language unit with completely non-verbal students. So I've had a range of experience of dealing with students with additional needs, not just dyslexia, but all range of difficulties. Then I moved to Singapore, and I taught at a large international school for 3 to 18-year-olds for 8 years, working in the learning support department, where we routinely screened the 3-year-olds for phonemic awareness. So what I was doing there in learning support was when they started at school, at prep, but prior to prep at kindergarten, we would screen for phonemic awareness. Then I finally moved to Australia, started doing some relief teaching, and managed to land myself a prep support role. So I started screening those kids for phonemic awareness, and the teachers were kind of like, "What are you doing? What's that assessment showing you?" And I kind of realised very quickly that what was routinely done perhaps overseas and perhaps consistently done between schools wasn't necessarily happening here. And that was about the time my eldest started prep, who's now in year 7. And I already knew she had difficulties with lots of things. So I knew that, her setting lists and lists of words home to learn was going to be a struggle, because that just wasn't the way that she needed to be taught how to read. So it was a big learning curve. And since then, obviously, the role grew. So I was started by doing, I think it was 2.5 days of just prep intervention. The role then grew to whole school intervention. Obviously, the hours increased because we couldn't fit it all in. And now I'm stepped away and find it very hard to just leave that team alone, and I'm always down in their office when they can't find me. There's now 3 of them. So there's a teacher and 2 highly qualified educational support running that whole team now, that whole department. So we now have a learning enhancement department, and they are running that themselves, which is fabulous. So it's been really successful in that respect, because we've managed to upskill them enough for me to step away into the AP role, which is great. And to have that team that really are looking, they're not just looking at intervention, they're looking at the extended kids too. So they're looking at, that's why we call it enhancement, because many of our kids at level who have difficulties are at standard, so which you'll see today. So again, since then I've done numerous courses and numerous things, because my youngest in grade 3 also struggles, and I have a daughter in grade 6 also on top of that. But I have carried out this AMADA course, so I've done the MSL training, the Orton-Gillingham training. I've actually completed the letters training twice, either face-to-face and online version. So they're all really reputable courses and well worth studying. And also the Writing Revolution recently was one that I really started to home in on, and we've really started to look at, and I'll talk about why we're looking at the Writing Revolution shortly. So why are we in the mess we're in? I'm sure quite a lot of you already know this here, that we are the lowest English speaking country on the PISA results, and that hasn't really changed too much in the last decade or so, which is quite frightening, and quite horrifying. That really, I remember talking about this at the very beginning when my daughter was in prep and going, it'll be okay, by the time she's in year 12 we'll be able to use assistive technology, and she's now year 7, and I'm still battling for accommodations in year 7. And still the secondary school don't really get it, even though, she was at our school and doing really successfully last year. The wheels have massively fallen off the cart. So if you're a parent here, I know how that feels, because we've had a shocking year with school refusal, not wanting to get through the door, won't attend, having gone from being this really confident kid at Bentleigh West to now she just doesn't want to go. And homeschool is awesome for her because she loves it, because she doesn't have to go. But, it can show you how quickly things can change without the right supports in place and the right accommodations. And I think I'm going to be in that battle for the next 6 years now till we get to year 12, with making sure she has those supports, which is slightly frustrating. So again, I'm sure Pam Snow probably shared some of this research with you when she spoke to your group. This is Victorian teachers. So the frightening thing is that every teacher wants to do a great job, and for those parents in the room, there's no teacher really out there that goes to work and goes, I don't want the kids to do the best they can do. That's just not in our workplace ethic. But unfortunately, we don't necessarily have the skills we need. So, 38% of teachers could define phonemic awareness. That's quite frightening, because really that is instinctively what they need to be taught in prep grade 1, grade 2. And if you don't know what that is, that's going to be a real challenge. 41% defined a consonant blend, 53% defined a morpheme, slightly better, and 63% thought reading difficulties could be helped with coloured lenses or overlays. And there's still very many APs, wellbeing leaders, recommending that people should go to get behaviour optometry, get the coloured overlays, the lenses, and that happens all the time. And we know that it's not, that's not best practice. So that was our kind of impetus for change, because we realised that the teachers didn't know. And the amount of times I've heard people say, this is the first dyslexic student I've taught, or this is the first student I've taught with these kind of difficulties. No, they just haven't been picked up before. And actually, I was just having a really interesting conversation as I left with my principal, because I just did all the NCCD data today, ready to go in tomorrow, and looking at our percentage increases of new kids coming in. And I would really like to compare that to other schools in the network, because again, I doubt we have more because we're zoned, but I would say that we're probably identifying them earlier and picking those kids up from the screening and the things that we're doing. So I would be really interested to compare that, because we're sitting at about 24% at our school, which is 157 kids on the NCCD, which again, when schools last week said anyone with learning difficulties or any kind of disability can come to school in this lockdown, that's why we had so many kids. So it's a challenging one. So we started to look at what we were putting in place, and we started to look at the programs that were in place. And when we look at things like the simple view of reading, which I'll talk a little bit about today, it has 2 arms. It has the decoding arm and it has the language comprehension arm. And we were doing the language comprehension stuff really, really well. We were reading lovely, rich text. We were exposing them to, awesome books, but we really didn't have a systematic approach to phonics. And yes, there was some happening. And many people say, I don't know any school that doesn't teach phonics. Probably right. However, there's teaching phonics and there's teaching phonics. And it needs to be systematic, and it needs to be explicit, and it needs to build upon itself. So it needs to be structured. So what we have done is we looked at that, and we look at the impact that phonics gets. 0.7, and look at the response to intervention model. So I did do a whole talk on the response to intervention model recently for LDA, so that's on their website. I'm not going to go into that too much today because it's a whole area in itself. But that's where we started to really look at that model, of that triangle model, and go, right, who are those tier 3 students that need the most support? But what was happening is the kids at the top of the tier were getting really good instruction and intervention, but our tier 1 wasn't right. The mainstream instruction was not evidence-based, and it was not getting, we're not getting enough from them. So we really started having a look at that, and we did start off, we put in spelling mastery, because if you're at the beginning of the journey, that's a really good place to start, because it is structured, it's explicit. Teachers didn't have the rules, and we needed something we could get pretty quickly before we upskilled them all. And then slowly over the 5 years, we upskilled the staff, but that took time. And sadly, it can't be turned around overnight. It does take that long to fix, you know, which again is really hard, because you're looking at those poor grade 5, 6s, which my daughter was one of them, and going, well, they've missed out on all this great instruction. And as a support teacher, that's hard to go, well, let's not worry about the 5, 6s, let's focus on the preps. So we started at foundation, and we made those changes at foundation and slowly rolled it out in front of that cohort. So they're now grade 5s. So we slowly worked through with those guys. This is why we made those changes. So you can see that, you know, where our results are now. For those who know NAPLAN data, parents might not be so familiar with the numbers. And this is the cohort that we were tracking. And it was just for the demographic we lived in, it was not good enough for Bentleigh West. We had 20% probably performing below level in grade 3, and that was rising to like 34% in grade 5. Which is unacceptable when most of our kids come to school, highly literate, been to the museums, been to, you know, exposed to rich literature, exposed to beautiful language, and it was just, you know, not acceptable. We really should have slimmed it right down, which we have now, to that 4 to 5%. So where did we start? We always get asked this question. We started with this simple view of reading. And I remember one of the very first staff meetings we had a look at, and we really unpicked that document, and we gave each team a little section of it. Okay, let's go and read that feedback. What does that mean? Because again, we were doing the read side really, really well, but we didn't have enough in place for the decoding side. And we know that when you times decoding by language comprehension, you get good reading comprehension. And again, this is a conversation I had with my year 7 English teacher just last week, actually, when she put my daughter down at a below standard as to where she was, and she struggled, so understandably. But I said, oh, where is she sitting? What have you based that figure on? So reading comprehension. I said, so what area? What is it? Is it the language comprehension, or is it the decoding that's holding her back? And then obviously it got very tricky because this poor graduate didn't quite know the answers. But again, we've got to say, so my teachers now, if they say there's a child behind, I'll say, well, where exactly are they struggling? Because that will depend on the intervention they need. If it's the language comprehension side of things, that's when I'll need the speeches help, and I'll need them to help me develop an appropriate program. If it's decoding, then we need to look at the phonics program. So we really need to be looking at that intervention and going, okay, one size doesn't fit all. We're not going to buy this program, it's going to fix them all. And it's the same in the classroom. And, you know, there's lots of gaps that were there at the beginning, from ILPs to programs to, you know, 6 or 7 different spelling programs, lack of consistent language. So there's a lot of things to change, but it does take, you know, it takes time, is what I'm saying. So don't, you know, especially if you're that literacy intervention teacher, which I was, banging my head against the brick wall and not getting anywhere. It was really frustrating that we knew that they were having this great instruction and intervention, but we just didn't have it mapped out for the classroom. And that took some time to map out the curriculum documents as well. It took a very long time to do so. So again, that's not to say that we focus on phonics only, and this is always the big one, the big argument that everyone just teaches phonics only and nothing else. That's certainly not the case at all. It's the big 5 or the big 6 that we do focus on. But if they can't lift the words off the page with the phonics in the first place, or the phonemic awareness even prior to that, you're not going to get reading comprehension. You're not going to get fluency, because they're not going to have enough words per minute to read. So that's really important. And then our big push now would be the vocab and the background knowledge. So now we know that the kids from prep to 2 or all the way up to grade 5 have had a really good exposure, as long as they've been at our school since the beginning, with phonics and phonemic awareness. We know that they've been exposed to structured literacy and morphology since prep. So we now need to have to look at their vocabulary and their background knowledge. And we're really focusing on the writing revolution for that. So although it's a writing revolution, we're focusing a lot on the reading and the content of what they're reading and how they're putting that into responses, written responses. Because again, if you're not exposing them, I saw a perfect example of that today. My friend's got a child in grade 5, not at our school, another school. And he was doing a piece of homeschooling today on the government. And they said, no, we're not giving them any guidance or any videos. We're going to get them to discover about the government. Well, I mean, that's impossible for a grade 5 student. You know, you've got to give them the building blocks and the background knowledge, because there's so much vocab. And I think Letters taught me that one of the key vocab things is kids in grade 3 to 6 should have 6 to 8 new vocab words a day, explicitly taught. So we've really hammed that vocab now, because how often do kids read a book and they come across a word they don't know and they don't ask? They'll just keep going. And they don't actually say, oh, I don't know what that word means. You know, so really hammering that vocab now, and even in the younger grades too, even if they come to school with a high vocab. And that's so important for students with dyslexia or learning difficulties, because often those kids, so my grade 3 has a vocab probably 2 years above his level, but the decoding holds him back. So we've got to be exposing those kids to high level literature and high level vocab. So we're not saying phonics only, is what I'm getting at in a long-winded way. The other big push, I think, and the important thing is that we know that if we don't intervene early, this is going to happen. So this is when, you know, we get these poor kids coming to our school in grade 3 or 4 or even 5 from other schools where they've struggled, or they haven't been picked up, or God forbid, some kids don't get picked up to a high school. And we know if we don't, it's not too late, obviously, it's never too late to intervene, but look at the difference if we intervene early. Otherwise, the gap's just going to get bigger and bigger. And this, the Matthew effects comes from the simple view of reading again. So one thing we did do very early on was we started screening all the prep kids before they start school. So they obviously start school in the February. In the October, hopefully this year, we'll be able to do it still. We screen those students for phonemic awareness. So we'll have a look at their assessments before they come in, so we can see who we're in. We're not diagnosing, we're not labelling. We're identifying who may have some gaps in phonemic awareness and may need some early intervention. So we can start giving some intervention in week 2 of prep, rather than wait till grade 1 when lots of schools will give reading support, or even later than that. So we can get in as soon as we can. And we don't just look at phonemic awareness, we also look at some language, some maths, some fine motor, some gross motor. So we have a comprehensive screening process when they first start. And the other really important part of that is talking to the parents. So finding out if they've ever repeated a year at school, if there's any family history of learning difficulties, and you find out all sorts in that pre-enrollment. So I mean, that's more useful obviously than many assessments that we have to do, but that's a really valuable one that we have put in, and we've tweaked it a little bit across the years. So we started using the C part to begin with, and then we've now moved across to the feeler assessment, both by Ros Nielsen, so both by who writes the SPAT-R. But the reason we've changed to the feeler is it actually identifies the higher achievers also. So it will show me who's already got some phonics and some decoding skills and some non-word spelling, so I can really start hitting those kids really early too, because we don't want to hold those back, obviously, and subject them to 3-4 sounds a week when they've already got most of their letter sounds. But we also want to identify if they have got phonics or have they relied on memory before they come to school. So we really look at that. Again, we looked at our program, and again, there's another, I'm not going to go too much into that. There's a whole nother webinar from Steven Capp, my principal, on the LDA website you could have a look at. But we teach by explicit direct instruction, and that's for literacy and for maths, and predominantly for science and humanities as well. Again, we'll often teach them skills and then they can go off and use those new skills in a more open-ended task. But what we found is we used to do big blocks of learning. So we do, maths is a good example of this. We do 2 weeks of shape, we do 2 weeks of number, and then we do 2 weeks of measurement. By the time we came back to number, we'd forgotten it all because you hadn't had that revision. So now we revise those things every day. And we will go over in their daily review those spelling rules every day, or those phonemes every day, or the morphology every day, because you can see what happens if not. They retain it straight away, and you know this with things we've done. If we're trying to take a screenshot of the computer screen and we can't remember how to do that screenshot, and we forget because we haven't done it, and we look it up and then we don't do it regularly enough, you forget. And that's exactly what happens with the kids. So what we now know is that we have to review things, and so we do what we call interleave and space practice. And what we will do is we'll put it into the review for 2 weeks. Some new learning, anything new today will be in the review for 2 weeks, and then it will come out of the review and it will come back in again probably 3 or 4 weeks later, so that the kids can keep getting that multiple exposures, because we know that kids need to be exposed to things at least 24 times to get it in their long-term memory. Kids with learning difficulties, such as dyslexia, it could be 150 times, 150 repetitions. And those are the kids you go, but I've taught them this and they can't remember any of it. Or did you not teach this last year when they were in grade 2 and I'm now the grade 3 teacher? And of course they did, but they just haven't retained it. So they need those multiple exposures, and it's really important that they do that. And that's why the intervention team will be teaching the same content as the tier 1, but they'll pre-teach it and they'll post-teach it, and so the kids are getting more exposures and can then obviously retain that and help their self-esteem at the same time. So again, as I said, just to hammer it, that it's not just one area, it's not just phonics, but that is important. And if you're not aware, the Australian government have now released their own phonics check as of a week ago. So it's a voluntary basis at the moment in Victoria. Some of the other states it's mandated, but we can use theirs instead of having to use the UK one. And Steven Capp was on the group that has written it, so we have seen it. It's good. They've reviewed some of the content of it, which is going to be really helpful. So that's probably the next assessment. So we look at their phonemic awareness in prep, before they come in. Obviously, we've got reading assessments that run through the school, but that's not running records, and I'll get to that shortly. But then we do use the phonics screening check in grade 1, because that's really useful to use the phonics check so that you can then see, okay, where are they tracking? Who are the kids that, and that also helps the teachers to know who they need to be targeting, because again, it all too often gets sent to the learning support teachers can just catch these kids up and you can fix them all the speeches, or, you know, the class teachers have to take ownership for those kids too, particularly the tier 2s that we're not seeing often enough. So that's really important. So again, it's putting everything into place, and I think I can't hammer that enough, that it's not just one area. So when we rewrite the curriculum, we rewrite the structured explicit curriculum for morphology. We rewrote it for vocabulary, so you knew which synonyms you're learning in prep, which synonyms you're learning in grade 1, which figurative language you're learning in prep. So it's all documented. So no longer do the teachers have to decipher the curriculum, it's all laid out for them week by week by week. So all the planning is there. The teachers can then spend their planning time really looking, how are we going to teach that? How does that look when we really want to clearly teach that? Because they can practice it basically before they teach it. So really important to do that. It's probably, I think it's 64 pages long, the literacy curriculum now, because it had to be all mapped out so that teachers knew exactly what to do. And it's constantly evolving. As I say, you know, having just done the writing revolution training, we're making tweaks and changes to it at the moment quite considerably, with especially to the writing stage of what we're doing there. Again, just another, I'm sure you're all familiar with the reading rope, because most people who would be attending a talk like this would probably already be well familiar with it. And if I was up there in person, I'd have my ropes out and you'd be actually physically making the reading rope. But sadly, I have to be here in my bedroom, so I can't do that with you. Again, I can't hammer enough how important the vocabulary strand is, because once they can decode, if there's vocab issues, it's going to be very, very challenging. It's no matter how well your decoding is. If I'm decoding something about, you know, the system of the heart, and I haven't got that background knowledge or that vocab, it means nothing to me, and then I can't answer those questions. Daniel Willingham does a really good video on that. I think it's content is knowledge, or sorry, content is reading. Dan Willingham, I'll find the link for you at the end. And he talks about baseball. And he talks about how the students in America, and it would be very similar here, completed their NAPLAN equivalent about baseball. And the kids who scored the highest were the kids actually who played baseball and understood the game, not necessarily the ones who could read the best. And that would be exactly the same for some of the content we sometimes have for NAPLAN. I think there was one a couple of years ago about wave-driven generators. Well, if you didn't know what a generator was, you're going to be pretty stuck to answer any of those questions. So again, it's understanding that those kids need to be exposed to that high level vocab and reading those books to those kids and those read aloud. So we did retain, when we talk about change model, we did retain a lot of our PM non-fictions, because that's a really good way to expose them to the vocab and comprehension once they can read in grade 3. So when we did shift to decodable books, that was one thing we have retained, and part of the home teaching model at the moment is the grade 3s have to listen. If they haven't got books at home, the teachers have read all the non-fictions and they have to write down some facts, and so as part of their grade 3 homework. So it's really exposing them to that vocab and making sure that we keep reading to the kids, you know, because we do stop way too early when we need to explicitly be reading aloud to our students even beyond the younger years. We also brought in some novel studies. So we managed to bring in novels from grade 2. But again, understanding that some kids struggle with decoding, so ensuring that those books are available in an audio format for them if they need them, so that kids can have access to audiobooks, and that's all kids can access that. So we have a couple of novels a year that they focus on from grade 2 all the way up to grade 6, so they can really study those. I'm going to whiz past that one because that's we're just talking about, I'm just very aware of time today, so we've got time for questions. Understanding that, again, it's the phonics, the graphemes, the letters, the phonemes. We really have a big focus, and this is from Bartek, the reading doctor. So we do use his software also. He's got some new software out that's not app-based, it's actually computer-based, and tracks the kids, tracks the phonemes they know, the irregular words they know, and well worth looking at. So as a school, we've subscribed to that for prep to 3. And then all the kids with intervention in the older years, and that has been a godsend. Now we're on home learning, because I can actually track how often they're using it, what progress they're making, their reaction time, how many times they've got the phonemes right, the irregular words right. It's amazing, and he's actually got university research behind it too from Adelaide University, which is awesome. These are probably 2 of our biggest Bibles. So explicit direct instruction obviously is the way we teach as a whole school. So that would be taking our structured literacy is the what, the EDI is the how we do it. So we take the structured literacy and we teach it through explicit direct instruction. And explicit direct instruction is the model of how we would lay out the classrooms, how we would teach whole school, how we would, engagement norms with the students. So all those, everything is modelled and everything is in place and consistent. So, when they move to year, you're not retraining them again. So it saves an awful lot of time, because we waste a lot of teaching time, getting to the mat, getting to different lessons. And so it's all of those things. We also did our grammar results, I have to say, are down to the work that we did many years ago with Bentleigh West, way before we even started on the structured literacy path. And again, teachers didn't have the grammar knowledge, just like they didn't have the spelling rules knowledge and the spelling knowledge, because they weren't necessarily taught that when they went to school or at uni. So we've had to really upskill the staff, and again, laying that out. What is what do we mean when we say a noun? What do we mean when we say an action verb? Is that language consistent across the school? So again, looking at phonemic awareness. So this is where we want the kids to enter school. Very few of ours, even in the suburb we live in, which is fantastic, do. So lots of them have got gaps here, and we have many kids that are entering here and still have got huge gaps. So again, we've used the Hegarty approach for phonemic awareness. So that is a fantastic program to start with. If you don't have anything in place, it's all mapped out for you lesson by lesson, week by week. So the teachers really love the Hegarty approach, which is great. But all our teachers have had the OG training as well, the Alton Gillingham MSL training. So 3Ging, this is always a really contentious one. So again, luckily in Victoria, we're not mandated to give in running record levels like some states in the country. So we did get rid of them, which took a while to get to and was quite controversial at the time. Teachers, we got to the point where teachers were coming to the principal and saying, why am I spending all this time doing a running record, but it's not really giving me the information I need? It's giving me a reading level, but I actually want to know on that simple view of reading what the gaps are. Okay, so I really want to see that, okay, they've got a gap in decoding, or they've got a gap, where are those gaps? So what we've replaced it with our Dyble's assessment. I think I've got it, I'm just going to get there and I'll come back. Yep, there, it's the one I wanted. So we replaced it with the Dyble's assessment, or Dibbles, depending how you want to say it. Various people say it differently, and that's used across the school, because again, we felt you've got to have a reading assessment. You can't just take away running records and go, well, we're not replacing it with anything. Whenever we took something away, we had something to replace it with, and that's why it took time. I would say if I'd had my way, it would have been 2 years previous that I would have got rid of those running records, but we have to be a little patient. So we do Dibbles 3 times a year. That tracks the reading data, but there's also materials there that can track them more often than that. So there's progress monitoring materials that you could do every week if you wanted to. But it helps you set those really clear goals. So you can set, okay, they're reading 67 words per minute. I want by the end of this ILP, at the end of this term, I want them reading 80 words per minute with the accuracy. I want to, so it does have some reading comprehension assessments. It has non-word reading, it has phonemic awareness, and it's free. So it's a fabulous assessment. So I'll just go back because I know I've missed a couple of things. We did a lot of work on cognitive load and how we very quickly overload their brains to be able to do more than one thing. We did a lot of work on working memory. So because of the amount of students we have with learning difficulties, often their working memory is compromised. So we take a lot of those things away, being very explicit on, these are the things you need for this lesson, make sure you've got them, this is exactly what you need. And so it's all there for them, ready to grab, so they're not wasting any time. Because obviously those kids who struggle, and that's what I do come back to, is these are the ones that it's vital for. It's imperative that they have this kind of support, yet it doesn't harm anybody. And even our best top kids, it helps them to understand the morphology and the spelling so that they can consistently understand when they're reading. Okay, construction, con means with or together, struct means to build. Oh, construction, that's what it means. I'm going to whiz past that because I've talked a bit about the tiers and you can refer back. The other assessments, if people aren't familiar, that we use is the motive assessments from Macquarie Uni. So a fantastic suite of assessments, and again, they're free. So if you're not registered, jump on and register. It takes a couple of days and they give you free access. So we use the CC2 a fair bit because that gives me a reading score for non-words, irregular words and regular words. So it really shows me and pinpoints where they're struggling. I often will use that and the LEST for new students coming in. So even if they're not prepped, we'll still screen them when they come in because we'll probably need to join the intervention team if they're moving mid-year. There's usually a reason. Some of our teachers use the DIST, the non-word spelling, and find that really useful too. So again, our assessments didn't match when we changed the curriculum and we changed what we're teaching. The assessments didn't marry it up. So we had to look at those. And again, now we're trying to marry them up with the writing stuff as well. So it's ever evolving. So once we had implemented all of these things, so with that cohort we had in prep, this was when they got to grade 2. So no longer did we have that 20% below level, it was slimmed right down, which was exactly what we wanted to see. and a lot more kids way above the level. Here, I like this one, even though it's very old, because again, this is that grade 2 cohort that are now in grade 5. Having a look at this data, you can see how many kids we were missing on below level, below standard. Whereas then you can see how that's really slimmed down. And it's really flipped that. Whereas before, that triangle was almost inverted, that we had all those kids that needed intervention. And it was, I was ending up with almost a class in intervention, which, you can see that it's close to 40%. 40–50%, which was just ridiculous, and it was growing. It wasn't getting any smaller. So whereas this is really what it should be. It should be that very small 4 to 5, 6%, and that's even with 150 kids on the NCTD at our school. It's that 24%, but we still only got that very small percentage that are below standards, and that's on multiple assessments from PAT, DIBELS. It's a real range. This is that same cohort. Okay, and you can see when they got up to grade 4, you can see where they're sitting. So you can see how high a lot of the kids are and above standards. That's just to focus on that. Obviously, spelling is the big one. So if kids are behind standard generally in reading, spelling often lacks as well, because it's very challenging to fix spelling, particularly if they've come in later in the day and they've joined us in grade 2 or 3 and they've got really difficult struggles with orthographic mapping. Because if they haven't got that background knowledge with phonemic awareness and phonology and even rapid naming to try and quickly recall things, it's very hard. So that's where we had to look at, okay, once we put the spelling scope and sequence out, we then had to look at morphology and go, okay, let's really develop a structured approach to morphology and map that out. So which prefixes, which suffixes, because otherwise, again, what was happening is you get to grade 4, 5, 6, where prefixes and suffixes were generally, hammered in the curriculum, but it was the same ones. They'd be taught the same prefixes, the same suffixes, because those were the ones the teachers were confident with. They wouldn't teach the more abstract suffixes or prefixes because they didn't necessarily know them. Okay. So again, just for those teachers out there who send the random spelling list, and I had one sent home with 400 words for my year 7 last week, and she was told to learn 10 words a week during remote learning, and it was a random list pretty much like this, to be honest, but with 400 of them, which we won't be learning, and I've sent them some research to have a look at, because this comes from Bill Hansbury, I did a PD with him once, and he's happy for me to continue to use this slide, because really look at all the different rules and things that are in that, and they're not irregular words. There should only be 4% of words that you really just memorize, and this was the same as poor Harriet's list. It was just full of all the ones that you could easily have grouped them together with the same suffix, the same prefix. But again, teachers, it's nobody's fault. They don't know how best, and what we know is best practice for these kids who struggle is best practice for everybody. We teach all the syllable types too, and again, that's so they can break words down, they can spell and read more complex words, and it's getting that language consistent across your school. So it's no good the teacher in prep calling it vowel silent E. It's no good the teacher in grade 1 then saying it's magic E, grade 2 saying it's bossy E, split vowel digraph, consonant E. You have to have that language consistent. So it doesn't matter if you're using Sounds Right or another structured literacy program, make sure the language is consistent across your school. Because, there's many schools that are saying, okay, well, I'm training my grade 1s in Sounds Right, but then they haven't trained the rest of the school and the language is not consistent and the kids get confused. I'm going to whiz past the videos, but I will let you see them at the end if we've got time. So data and tracking, we've talked a little bit about DIBELS. We do use PAT testing. I do still pull from Cars and Stars, particularly actually for one of my non-verbal students, because there's no point me doing a DIBELS assessment on him. He can't read the DIBELS assessment in a timed fashion, but I still need to do some reading assessments with him. CPAR or FELA now we've moved to, and phonics screening check and motive assessment. So I think I've covered most of the assessment tracking for literacy. Obviously maths, we would, if we had time, we'd talk about that too. We all finger spell, so we would teach them to finger spell the sounds of the words, because if they're doing chain, they would go ch, a, n. Oh, it's in the middle, so I know it's ai. Whereas otherwise, if it was at the end, it would be ay. So we'll explicitly teach them to do that as a skill, because then that helps them to know the positioning of the word and really break those phonemes, morphemes down, look at the origin of the word. So really looking at the curriculum and going, okay, let's really hammer how we, and our spelling results have actually grown probably more than our reading, which is a really good indication, because those kids actually understand the words. They're not just lifting them off the page. I'm going to go past this one. So the reason we hammered morphology is because look at how many prefixes and suffixes are in those words. So again, it's been really, really good to have a look at that morphology, because it improves their vocabulary development. It helps their comprehension. It's great for maths and science. I was doing some work yesterday with my son who's grade 3. Perimeter. Okay, what does perimeter mean? Oh, peri means around, meter means to measure. You measure around. he knew exactly what to do because of the morphology behind the subject. Same with things like science and history, and we know it improves their spelling. So, you know, build is a very complex word to spell because of the vowel team in the middle. Construct, which is a far better vocabulary choice, is actually fully decodable and very easy for the kids to sound out and spell once they've got that vocab. So morphology has been mapped out again across the school, so we know exactly where we're heading with it. I might come back to the videos at the end if I've got time. We do still have a lot of children who struggle and obviously have those challenges at our school. So again, it's making sure those accommodations are in place. So one of the big things of home learning has been great to be able to really hammer those kids with using Microsoft 365. So again, every child in the whole country has access to 365. It's completely provided free, no matter whether you're at a government school or Catholic school or independent school, or so we use that. Using that dictation software is absolutely vital from about grade 3 onwards. Having audiobook access, you know, having a scribe where necessary. So again, in a primary school context, those kids can have those accommodations at NAPLAN without a formal diagnosis, as long as it's in place. And we have plenty of children who were using a scribe or typing NAPLAN as required to have that accommodation in place. It's all about having a history there and having that documented history. So when you do get to VCE, you know, that's why, for example, I did ask Harry at school what level she's on the NCCD, because I need that history, I need that documentation to be able to support her to get the right accommodations in year 12. Yeah, they love me at the moment, not. Again, those kids can have self-esteem issues pretty damn quickly. As I said, you know, we had a very confident kid until not, you know, 6 months ago, and we've got to be really careful. So there are some things we put in place for those students. They have, you know, the red card system where they can be exempt from class when things are too stressful, or they have their profiles, their performers, which I'm just going to go to. I'll come back. This one. This is one from quite a long time ago, when she was in grade 5. So they have input, and these students would write these cards so they can go not only in the CRT folder, but they can have it in their bag. So if they are struggling, they can go, if I've got a relief teacher today and she's never had me before and she's asking me to read aloud to the class, or she's asking me, telling me I can't, you know, use my computer, they know exactly what they can have, what accommodations they're entitled to and what they can use. And this just is trying to teach them to advocate for themselves, which has definitely worked, because she asked her science teacher recently if she could have a reader for the forces test they were doing, that she was then told, no, you've got to be able to read it yourself. But she tried to advocate for herself. So it's again giving them that voice and trying to get them included in their goal setting. I'll just come back because I want to talk about the technology. So in the classroom for those guys, and again, every teacher here would have these kids in their classroom, whether they're diagnosed or not. They need extra time. They can't process as quickly as the other. And that's been one of the challenges of EDI, and this pace at which lessons move, and making sure that those guys can keep up. And even some of the parents have commented on the remote home learning videos that they go very fast. Probably the benefit of that has been they can pause them, which has been great. But understanding that those kids, okay, they don't necessarily have to do every question, or things like spelling mastery can be challenging. We do have a few kids who don't do it at all because their processing speed is not there to be able to keep up with it. Starting with a keyboard. So we subscribe to Nessie Fingers to give them touch typing experience from grade 4. Probably I would like to push it to 3, because again, the more touch typing they can get, the better. And we advise the parents to do that 3 times a week if possible, because they need that multiple exposures again for touch typing. I wish I'd been taught to touch type at school. I would be much better now. But again, it's ensuring that you get that balance. So we do have an explicit focus on handwriting in the younger years. So we don't have a BYO device for everybody. It's really only for those students who really need it. Otherwise, we use the school devices. Making extra time for them, and again making sure these kids are not the ones kept in at recess to finish things, and you know, because it does give them these, if they're really confident at speaking and articulating work, these are the ones that can use that voice to text software really easily, and just thinking slightly differently on how you assess those kids. Text to voice, picture software, just, you know, even organizing things to how we would structure it, with trying to get consistent graphic organizers at the moment, for example, for the writing tasks, so that again, every time you start a writing piece, if it's a persuasive, it's the same graphic organizer, so you're not reinventing the wheel every time. So, okay, well, this is the next time we're doing it, we're going to use a different organizer, and the poor kids, you know, are starting from scratch again. So, and again, it's sometimes really hard when those kids are new in grade 5 or 6 and they're pretty resistant to using technology or resistant to anything looking different. So again, that's where the Microsoft stuff is fabulous. It's really good. I'll send this through. So it's not a very clear app. It shows you a lot of the apps, but what I've done is I've broken that down a bit. So just some of the apps that you can use to support. So the Nessie apps are fabulous. There's also a Nessie program that parents can purchase as well. The decodable books are also fabulous. The good old trusted word shark, old as it may be, is still very effective. So it still comes out on a USB, unfortunately, not a app because it's too big. A Soundway, not to be confused with sound waves, is a whole class phonemic awareness. Again, been around for a very long time, but it's now available on a whole class interactive whiteboard version. Ausphonics is great because it's actually Australian voices as opposed to American or English accents, so that's really good. The Reading Doctor's also fabulous. As I've said to you before, there is apps, but he's also got this new software, which is absolutely wonderful. And then with some things like Explain Everything and Kidspiration are really good for mind mapping, because the kids who have executive functioning difficulties need that support in getting their ideas ready to be able to produce a piece of writing. With the older kids, if you're primary or secondary, things like Prismo and SnapType, again, probably not so needed now you've got Microsoft 365, because Microsoft 365 will do that for you. If you use Office Lens, you can take a photograph of the document and then turn that into a speaking document, or that you can turn the worksheet. So I'm thinking now for your high school, early year 7, 8, when you've got a worksheet or a textbook, and you want to turn that into a working document that they can write on and they can read on. And it's really kind of taken us away from using things like Drag and Speak, Clarice, even iRead, Write, Explain Everything, Write Online. A lot of these are kind of defunct now. Now we've got Microsoft 365. Oh, sorry. It will do all that for you. So Microsoft 365 now has really all those functions there. And if you haven't seen it, I mean, you probably could get Troy, who does Microsoft work, to do a talk for you and go through all the technology. But again, it's free to all government schools, independent schools, and all of them, and it's very valuable software. So we've really put up the use of that during our home learning environment and getting the kids to practice that. So it's been really valuable for the grade 5, 6s. So really, really useful. I've put some useful websites and things at the end as well that I want you to be able to have a look at. So I'll send that through. And there's some other, this is the one I was talking about before. I was just trying to get to the chat so I can see it as well, but I can't. The teaching content is Teaching Reading, which is one Dan Willingham that I said about, but there's also some great useful that Bill talks a lot about working memory and why that's important, and the repetition is important. The Reading League does some really good webinars that you can watch too, and as I said before, the LDA ones lately have been fabulous. So there's been a whole host of people from Universal Design for Learning was Kate de Bruin, hers was fabulous. There was one on English as second language speakers, and they're all recorded on the website, so you can go back and watch those. They're about 40 minutes, I think, with questions afterwards, but well worth having a look at. I say that our principal did a whole school approach, and I did a just response to intervention, and David McCunis also did the word retrieval, the spaced and interleave practice as well. If you haven't seen Outside the Square, they're also available free to have a look at. But again, it's I always come back at the end to, those kids who do struggle, and making that we need to keep them engaged and keep them supported with the right supports. But what works for them actually works for everybody. So it's best practice for everybody is what they have got. The best instruction for them is structured, explicit, phonics, morphology, vocab, all of it. Mapping that out helps the teachers too, because they don't have to then spend all their time planning and looking at what they're going to teach. I'm going to stop so I can answer some questions before dinner. I probably missed them all because I couldn't see the chat while I was unfortunately. So I'll come back to the beginning and have a look. All right.
Some of us have just been having a little chat in there, Sarah, too. I think everyone, I wouldn't be alone sitting here, that was 45 minutes, and I could sit and listen to Sarah all day. And I think people probably haven't been typing in questions because they're just listening to her going, oh my goodness.
I'm happy for people to unmute themselves if they're confident enough to ask a question.
Yeah, the wealth of knowledge that she has is just extraordinary, and I feel very lucky that she's in the government system, and that she's very happy to share and support all of us.
I'll see if there's any questions.
So ask away. Well, we've still got 10 minutes before Sarah has to get back to her own family. Sarah, maybe if you could say, because you really are a long way ahead of many of us, and your school is, and I know you're good at acknowledging that, saying this is your own journey started many years ago and your school's journey is 5 years. So if we're just looking at where we start, you would talk, and I've got a page of notes I've been typing out here, and I've been following you for a long time, but you would talk about phonemic awareness in phonics and F1-2. Get that right?
Yeah, definitely.
Get that really.
We started just in prep, not even prep 1-2. We just started in foundation. The very first thing I ever did was take away the high frequency list of meow words that were going home. That was my first move. That was my very first thing. I went, right, that's stopping. We're not doing those anymore.
Yes.
I rewrote them and grouped them accordingly. So I grouped the words that had the same phonemes together, and then I would have the 4% of irregulars with a little asterisk. And that list, I think, is still being used now. So we regrouped those. So that was the very first thing I did. And then really we laid it out in prep. So because you can't try and change everybody at the same time. And then we focused on spelling. So spelling was the big
That's the next thing I wrote down. Yeah.
Because our reading results were actually okay. You know, they were pretty good. We were a coasting school. We were fine. We didn't want to be a coasting school. We're now a high performing school, which is much better. Because we didn't want to be that coasting school. The reading was okay, but spelling was abysmal. The spelling results were terrible because we weren't teaching it properly. So and focusing on spelling was good, because really your preps 2s, almost the whole school was focused on the same spelling rules at the beginning, because no one had them. None of the older kids knew them either. So it was a good place to start and to upskill. And I started doing things that, the coaching model that we looked at. So instead of going, okay, let's go and watch those teachers, I'd go in and take their class. And go, no, I'm going to, because if you watch them, they'll go, well, I can't do that with my class because I've got Fred and Johnny and Bill they've got behaviour needs, so that won't work in my grade. So I'd go in and actually take, and still will do it now, go in and take their grade, model it, show them what we would do, exactly what we would do with the kids. And then we can go, okay, now we'll watch them teach the kids as well. So it's, really looking at that, the coaching model, when you just go watch someone and make an assumption on what you've seen from one lesson. As we all know, we can all have great or bad lessons. It doesn't necessarily be the best model. So now part of the PDP process is they do video models of themselves, so they'll reflect on their own teaching, and they've been able to do that really well now with the video remote learning. So it's kind of well and truly embedded, and we're using that at a network level to share lessons now, which is great. But that would be the place to start, starting at prep, starting at foundation, get that structured phonics there first, and then you can focus on the next bits. And as I say, kind of maths just followed, because we weren't really focusing on maths, but I think last year we had one child at band 3 in maths, because inadvertently we've been focusing on literacy and going, well, let's revisit, let's review things daily. We did the same for maths, we rolled out the same thing, and then obviously the maths results massively grew too, to the point where we didn't really need the intervention.
Sarah, you made a comment about, and I commented in the chat a little bit, you talked about you're constantly tweaking, but I think it is really important that people understand that's around keeping that bedrock of what we know works in place. It's not big changes, because it does start with, you referred to those reports earlier on, and the teacher knowledge, and that is really important, because once you've got that, you know how to pick and choose from things, and it's not I think I said something like, I can't remember, that constantly evolving, but the building blocks would have to be non-negotiable. You would have to have
change the phonics. They're not allowed to change the phonemic awareness. They're not allowed to play with that bit at all, because that's all successful and works. And what we know is that you can't have people coming back from a PD going, I want to try this. Well, if you can try it, is there evidence and research behind it? Because if not, we're not taking that risk on our kids. We can't have a year or two to spare to trial that if there's no research and evidence behind it. With research and evidence, we'd change tomorrow and say we'll put that in place. But it's got to be backed by research and evidence to know that it's going to work, because these kids can't afford time for practice.
And when you talked about, I know this would be common in many schools, when you look across your school and you don't have unlimited resources, and those 5, 6s and the year 4s have had more opportunity to slip behind, and you feel that desperate need to focus on them, but at the same time you're looking at F1-2s thinking that is where we need to start. So it is good to look at when you give these presentations, we're looking at your school as a whole, and it can feel a little bit overwhelming. You listen to you and think, oh my goodness, where are we going to start? A comment I had too was around just also that a lot of your professional learning that I know you've done is not from within the department, and and the resources you're talking about are not things. You obviously came, because you'd come internationally, you'd also come with a lot of knowledge with you. So that can be a challenge too.
Oh, most definitely. I've just completed the VAPA course literally as of the last 2 days ago. And
what is that, Sarah?
That's the Victorian Aspiring Principals course, which I kind of was name was put forward by regional director, so I kind of went, yeah, probably should do it.
I wonder why, but yeah.
But again, you've got to be really careful with those things, because, you know, when I'm commenting and talking about explicit phonics, and the lady interviewing I know has come from a reading recovery background, stroke inquiry based learning model, and she's the person doing the online 90-minute interview. You know, what I'm saying is completely very far removed to what she knows about. So it is a challenge, and I still have those challenges. You know, it's still difficult, because yes, we're in the department system, and many of the HIT strategies do fit with EDI really beautifully.
Absolutely.
So you are constrained by the system you work in, obviously, and you have to maintain it within that system. But there's still a lot of, we're lucky there's a lot of flexibility in Victoria. Yeah. Unlike, you know, certain other states where they say they have to, their running records, they have to put that to the department, they have to upload them. You know, we don't have any of that here. Working against us or for us, because it means we're not going to ever get a phonics check. But
yeah, sure. Come on, ask away, people. It's 5:20. We might have a couple of more minutes before Sarah's got to go and talk to her children. Has anyone got any questions?
I've got a quick one, Sue. I'm just wondering, probably many people are, can we have your slides, or at least maybe a list of the many resources that you've shown us?
Yeah, it can definitely happen. There is a question that you've just said, Sue, what does a 2-hour literacy block look like at Bentleigh West? So again, we're very much away from that model of an hour of reading, hour of writing, you know, hour of group rotations, because we know the research behind group rotations is not great. That the group you're with might be getting good instruction, or they might be being interrupted by the 4 other groups that are doing busy work. So we do a lot of whole class work. That would be 10-15 minutes phonics or morphology, depending on what year level you're in. There would be 10-15 minutes of vocabulary building. It would be broken up into, you know, a writing component and reading component within that. Spelling mastery would be 15 minutes. So it's very fast-paced, but and that took a long time for staff to get their head around too.
I think it was drilled into many of us just at the time I came through, and there's probably, looking at the faces around the screen, a bit similar, that, you know, whole class wasn't the way to do things. That very strong, you know, push for differentiation, and it's but I think probably for you guys the gap isn't.
No,
that's just huge in your classes now. The kids are coming through with that really good foundation, so you really know what they've had. So it's at
the beginning we had to stream spelling mastery, but now we don't need to do so much, because kids have had that instruction all the way through. I did just say question there, is Nessie for everyone or just for those children needing extra support? So Nessie Fingers, the touch typing, is for all of them, because everybody needs to learn to touch type. Reading Doctor is only it's for prep to 3 for everybody, and beyond that it's just the intervention students.
You don't use the Nessie reading program?
No, I don't, because we've got reading. We're using the Reading Doctor. Yeah. So his new program is wonderful. So we use that, but Nessie's great as well. Nessie's good.
Yeah. Oh, Sarah, look, I'm so aware of that time. I'm so aware of how stressful things are in your life, and you're probably, got children to see, and just also resonates, I think, with many of us that that challenging transition from some of our year 6s into year 7, which you're experiencing. That, you know, that can be a really tricky time, and particularly for our children who have additional learning needs. That's a really difficult transition. So good luck to you and your daughter. I think on behalf of everybody, just want to say a huge thank you to Sarah for giving us her time, generously sharing those slides and putting all those resources in there for us, probably given us all about a year's PD in there. And
I'll send through a timetable as well, just so you can see the structure of the literacy block.
Awesome.
I'll send you through a few things and just take what you want.
Sarah's always very generously shared with me, has done over the last couple of weeks too, when I've asked her for things. So very appreciate that. So thank you, everybody, and keep in touch. Read Ballarat. We'll have, you know, more things on.
Well, hopefully I can come up and visit you all in person at some point.
Yes. Yeah. Well, we'll be coming to you. We'll have a bus
one day when we can get out of this.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
See you.